History pivots on moments of terrible clarity. Recent Pentagon simulations lay bare a sobering reality. America's naval supremacy in the Western Pacific, the region's security bedrock since 1945, now stands on perilously thin ice. Multiple war games conclude with US carriers disabled, forward bases compromised, and Taiwan's defenses overwhelmed within weeks. Although outcomes vary, a 2024 CSIS study found that China achieves its core objectives in more than half of invasion scenarios. Meanwhile, in sterile laboratories from Silicon Valley to Shanghai, a different kind of arms race unfolds as engineers develop the foundations of a future superintelligence. The Trump administration inherits a world where China has metamorphosed from partner to existential rival, its armada now eclipsing America's, its ballistic arsenal, specifically engineered to neutralize US carrier groups. Though America's economy still dominates, China orchestrates the vital supply chains powering our digital civilization. The exotic minerals in every smartphone, the fabrication capacity for quantum-era microchips, the lithium arterial system energizing tomorrow's transportation. Pax Americana, that magnificent epoch of stability, never derived its power from ideological seduction alone. In truth, it always flowed from colossal hard power, nuclear-powered leviathans projecting force across vast oceans and stealth bombers jetting through hostile airspace. China studied this imperial playbook and has since inverted it, constructing a parallel system of unprecedented ambition. The Trump White House responds with a return to unapologetic realpolitik, repatriating vital industrial capacities to American soil, deploying tariffs as economic munitions, and recalibrating military doctrine for great power, confrontation, rather than peripheral counterinsurgency. As Chinese research institutes outpace their American counterparts in AI patent filings and deploy increasingly autonomous weapons platforms, the race accelerates toward algorithms that might someday rewrite the true story of war and peace. Grim perhaps, but indeed, the contest of tomorrow belongs to those who master the mathematics of power. President Trump is under no illusions that America's power depends on its economic strength, and the US economy stands at a towering $30 trillion. In comparison, China's economy stands at $18 trillion, though this gap continues to narrow. Without economic primacy, military superiority for the United States becomes unsustainable. The US economy demonstrates remarkable strength and resilience as we move through early 2025, with multiple indicators pointing to sustainable growth and prosperity. The American economy remains the world's largest, representing a quarter of global output. It grew by 2.8% in 2024, showcasing incredible vitality for such a massive entity. Inflation has stabilized at a manageable 3%, while showing encouraging signs across multiple sectors. US housing markets may begin to normalize, with markets in high-growth states like Texas and Florida showing signs of cooling after extensive development. The rental market seems to have reached equilibrium thanks to robust multifamily construction, and consumers are benefiting from declining gasoline prices, now at just over $3 per gallon. Beef and egg prices have risen sharply, but pork, poultry, dairy, bread, and most produce items are growing at or below the 3% inflation rate. The labour market exemplifies American strength with unemployment at 4%, indicating full employment, while wages are growing at 3.8%, outpacing inflation and delivering real income gains that strengthen household finances and purchasing power. The Federal Reserve's monetary policy stance reflects confidence in market fundamentals, with federal funds interest rates between 4.25% and 4.5%. This doesn't represent excessive tightening, as some suggest, but rather a return to historical norms after years of extraordinary accommodation. Meanwhile, the dollar remains strong at 104 on the index, though recent signs of softening could boost export competitiveness if realized. Both businesses and consumers express optimism about future prospects, with confidence indexes at and over 103, above both neutral thresholds and historical averages. This positive sentiment creates a virtuous cycle of spending and investment that may accelerate momentum throughout 2025. Standing atop America's towering economy, the Trump administration seeks to rapidly resolve the Ukraine conflict. This conflict has led Russia only deeper into China's sphere of influence. Russia, as a neutral power or tacit American partner, would prove far more valuable than driving it permanently into Beijing's orbit, and Trump is well aware. In fact, Trump's outsider status as a non-traditional politician gives him a unique advantage in resetting relations with Russia. Free from the entanglements and history of conventional Washington diplomacy that have made previous efforts impossible. His approach so far represents potentially the most significant realignment since Nixon opened relations with China to isolate the Soviet Union, though now in reverse. There can be no doubt that Putin currently holds the advantage in Ukraine. Despite Western and US support, Ukraine continues to lose territory and faces significant challenges maintaining adequate troop levels. Trump's approach is pragmatic: concede to Putin's core demands, the permanent annexation of Crimea and Donbass, and crucially, Ukraine's exclusion from NATO. While deeply difficult for President Zelensky and potentially the European Union, this concession could create an opening for the US to develop warmer relations with Russia and ultimately drive a wedge in the Russia-China axis if the Trump administration executes effectively. Putin and his chief diplomat, Sergei Lavrov, rank among the world's most seasoned geopolitical tacticians, making this diplomatic achievement a formidable challenge, yet not without promise. In the proposed peace deal, Ukraine gains little beyond ending active hostilities. Despite falling far short of Zelensky's aspirations, Ukraine has little leverage in negotiations, with a new form of hard realism taking hold in Washington. The Trump administration has rejected formal security guarantees, but implicit protection may emerge through economic arrangements. The treaty would grant American companies rights to Ukraine's rare earth metal deposits, valued at $500 billion. Establishing American mining operations on Ukrainian soil could create de facto military security through the implied protection of US investments. Trump knows that supporting Zelensky's ambitions for total victory would merely prolong a conflict that diverts Western resources and attention from the Pacific theater, where the true contest for 21st century dominance will unfold. Trump's NATO strategy recognizes the fundamental transformation of international institutional structures. Originally established to counter Soviet expansion, NATO's purpose has evolved significantly in the post-Soviet era. Today's commitments often constrain American strategic flexibility rather than enhance it. What once effectively projected American influence now requires compromises increasingly disconnected from core interests. NATO's contemporary value lies less in its military dimension and more in its role as a diplomatic framework, preventing European powers from developing independent alignments with China and other competitors. As the Trump administration redefines America's position within the alliance, it must acknowledge this continued utility despite NATO's limitations. So far, Trump is leveraging America's dominance in NATO to pressure European allies into accepting his Ukraine peace deal. The deliberate ambiguity around US commitment to NATO creates uncertainty among European leaders and may indeed force them to make concessions to preserve American security guarantees. The administration calculates that Europe will ultimately back Trump's proposals because they cannot afford the alternative of American NATO withdrawal. With the United States providing 70% of NATO's military spending, it would seem European nations have no viable option but to acquiesce. Trump's negotiations with NATO nations is not without risk, however. Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer's approval of a $500 million Chinese embassy in potential development of an $800 billion Chinese investment plan for the UK demonstrates that Europe already hedges its bets. Europe could pivot swiftly toward closer relations with China if America pursues rapprochement with Russia. A Europe aligned with China would represent a severe and unnecessary setback for the United States, underscoring NATO's ongoing importance in maintaining American alignment. Certainly for America, the optimal outcome is a remilitarized Europe that remains dependent on American leadership, powerful enough to be useful, but not independent enough to challenge American interests. While America navigates Ukraine and NATO's future, it simultaneously faces challenges in the Middle East, including ongoing tensions between Israel and Iran. Candor is essential in assessing Israel's ongoing conflict with the Palestinians. Israeli leaders claim their military actions target Hamas specifically, but many critics see their operations as tantamount to ethnic cleansing. Such actions seem to have been characterized, in essence, as genocide by the International Court of Justice. While Gaza's humanitarian situation has deteriorated severely, it's important to acknowledge that Israel has faced violent attacks on its civilians since its founding and has fought for its national identity, not just for decades, but really for thousands of years. In any case, Israel's intentions have been made clear. Despite numerous attempts to negotiate a lasting settlement, Israel has rejected any form of a two-state solution for over 5 decades, revealing a consistent refusal to accommodate Palestinian sovereignty. This doesn't seem to bother the Trump administration as it applies its hard-nosed realism to the Middle East, Israel, and Gaza. By leveraging America's special relationship with Israel, the administration secures a critical strategic foothold in a region essential for global energy supply chains and trade corridors. This partnership positions Israel as America's premier regional proxy, effectively functioning as an unsinkable aircraft carrier in an increasingly contested zone where Chinese influence continues to expand. The administration's pragmatic approach acknowledges the power of the Israel lobby, whose network extends throughout Congress, media organizations, and financial institutions. This entrenched interest group creates a powerful donor class that has severely constrained policy alternatives regarding Israel in the past. Despite large segments of the American public questioning Israeli military actions, the Trump administration has aligned strongly with Israel and its lobby and even threatened university funding over what it terms anti-Semitic protesting. Trump's recently proposed Gaza redevelopment initiative exemplifies strategic brilliance. Beyond addressing humanitarian concerns, this plan could transform crisis into opportunity by establishing an American reconstruction that creates dependencies that translate directly into political leverage. The arrangement would establish nominal Palestinian governance while ensuring effective American dominance, with U.S. corporations securing infrastructure contracts and American security forces maintaining regional stability. Though complex and not without hazard, this approach could create a functional protectorate that simultaneously checks Iranian influence, enhances surveillance capabilities, and positions America at the nexus where Europe, Africa, and Asia converge. Crucially, it acts as a counterweight to China's Belt and Road ambitions in the region, while reinforcing America's position in great power competition. The administration thus aims to convert a seemingly intractable conflict into a mechanism for advancing core American interests, characteristic of its unapologetically realist foreign policy doctrine. As Israel's principal adversary, Iran presents a complex strategic challenge. Experts suggest Iran could produce weapons-grade uranium within weeks and a warhead within a year. From the realist's perspective, Iran's incentive is to acquire nuclear arms quickly and quietly. After all, nuclear deterrence offers the only guaranteed protection against regime change, making their pursuit of such weapons entirely predictable regardless of diplomatic overtures. Indeed, the United States and its special ally, Israel, face a tense dilemma regarding Iran. If intelligence indicates it approaches weapons-grade capability, Israel may consider extreme countermeasures, including nuclear strikes on Iranian facilities. But this is not without significant challenge. Iran's critical nuclear facilities are hardened against conventional attacks, buried hundreds of meters beneath mountain ranges at sites like Fordow. Defense experts note that Israel's current military capabilities, even including their most advanced bunker-busting munitions, cannot penetrate these positions independently. Any decisive action against Iran's nuclear program would require sophisticated U.S. military intervention, specialized penetrating ordnance, and joint operational planning. Moreover, if Iran does obtain nuclear weapons, a cascade effect would likely follow. Gulf states, Turkey, Iraq, and Egypt would undoubtedly accelerate nuclear arms development, creating a Middle Eastern nightmare. It would seem the Middle East and the US, by extension, find themselves in a paradox of nuclear proliferation. The nuclear proliferation paradox reveals an important pattern. Conflict intensifies during the development phase, but diminishes once nations finalize their nuclear capabilities. This is nuclear deterrence in action. The threat of devastating retaliation creates mutual vulnerability that constrains aggressive action. Experts recognize the period between initial nuclear development and established deterrence as a critical window when preventive action is still possible. After this window closes, deterrence permanently alters power dynamics in the region. For Israel, this nuclear timeline represents their paramount security concern. The Trump administration must now navigate perhaps diplomacy's most dangerous tightrope, preventing proliferation while avoiding direct conflict with Tehran and China. As the administration confronts these challenges, it simultaneously faces another dimension of vulnerability: America's dangerous dependence on foreign supply chains for critical technologies and materials. America's supply chain vulnerabilities concentrate in several critical sectors: semiconductor manufacturing in Taiwan, rare earth mineral processing in China, pharmaceutical ingredients across India and China, and advanced battery materials throughout Southeast Asia. China currently controls approximately 85% of global rare earth processing capacity, giving Beijing near monopolistic power over these critical elements essential for everything from smartphones to military hardware. These dependencies have become starkly evident in recent years and create dangerous leverage points for the US. During COVID-19, America's dependence on Taiwan's advanced semiconductors led to crippling auto industry shutdowns. Repatriating these supply chains represents not merely an economic consideration, but an imperative to preserve national security. So far, the administration has attracted unprecedented foreign investment as part of this strategy. In his first 2 months in office, Trump secured a $500 billion domestic investment from Apple and, most notably, a $165 billion investment from Taiwanese TSMC, the world's premier semiconductor company. With China's increasingly aggressive posture toward Taiwan, raising the spectre of an invasion, TSMC's investment represents a critical step in America's broader strategy to onshore critical technologies. The importance of this single investment cannot be overstated, but Trump also has his sights set on Greenland. Arctic ice retreat has uncovered an estimated $30 trillion in untapped resources and opened shipping routes that could reduce maritime travel between Asia and Europe by up to 40%. Russia is militarizing its northern coast, and China has declared itself a near-Arctic state. In response, the Trump administration has committed to negotiating with Greenland for access to its vast rare earth deposits, which contain 25% of the world's undeveloped reserves. Some experts suggest that offering $1 billion aid package, double Denmark's annual contribution, plus robust security guarantees, could provide Greenland with a compelling proposition to partner with the United States. As the Arctic becomes a new frontier for great power competition, strategic interests are increasingly outweighing environmental concerns. Trump has abandoned the Paris Agreement's emission reduction mandates, and major energy corporations are already planning drilling operations in Alaska's reopened Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. This decision prioritizes immediate energy security advantages over long-term climate concerns, recognizing that unilateral American carbon restrictions would benefit competitors like China, who face no equivalent constraints. On the other side of the world, $270 billion in annual trade flows through the Panama Canal, including U.S. energy, goods, and military vessels. Jimmy Carter's 1977 treaties surrendered American control of this crucial waterway, a concession that abandoned vital national security infrastructure. Trump's administration has pressured Panama to prioritize U.S. interests, seeking to rectify perhaps one of the worst errors in American foreign policy. His efforts have in part culminated in a BlackRock-led consortium's $23 billion purchase of key ports from C.K. Hutchison in March 2025. This shifts control from a Hong Kong firm linked to China's Belt and Road and counters Beijing's maritime ambitions in Latin America. By reclaiming dominance over this historic trade artery, America strengthens its positional superiority in a region long considered its backyard. America's drive for supply chain independence, seen in Trump's rapid moves across semiconductors, rare earths, Arctic resources, and the Panama Canal, is crucial for securing national sovereignty and countering rivals like China. Complementing these efforts, the administration has imposed 25% tariffs on China, Mexico, and Canada, countries that have long taken advantage of America through unfair trade practices. These nations have driven persistent U.S. trade deficits, amounting to hundreds of billions each year. They subsidize their export industries to undercut American products, and China deliberately devalues its currency. These actions have consistently violated WTO rules since the 1990s. By imposing tariffs on foreign imports, domestic manufacturers gain competitive advantages that stimulate expanded production capacity, create manufacturing jobs, and ultimately rebuild American industrial self-sufficiency. In addition, these tariffs also effectively weaponize America's consumer market and leverage access to American consumers as pressure to force favorable concessions from trading partners. While the administration's trade strategy aims to rebuild American manufacturing and leverage relationships for economic advantage, these efforts face a sobering fiscal reality. It's no secret that America's budget deficit is unsustainable. $5 trillion in tax revenue against $6.5 trillion in spending yields a $1.5 trillion annual shortfall that swells the $35 trillion national debt. Interest payments now consume almost 15% of the total budget, diverting critical resources from military, infrastructure, and technology development to foreign creditors. This debt spiral fuels borrowing, inflation, and jeopardizes the dollar's reserve currency status, a cornerstone of U.S. global power. The dollar's reserve status functions as an exorbitant privilege, enabling sanctions, favorable borrowing terms, and forcing foreign banks to hold over $7 trillion in U.S. debt. Effectively a global low-cost loan the U.S. has come to rely on. Losing this privilege would significantly impair American power projection and debt feasibility. Naturally, China has sought to erode dollar dominance through the creation of yuan-denominated oil contracts and the establishment of alternative financial infrastructure like the Cross-Border Interbank Payment System, CIPS. The yuan remains in far reach of replacing the US dollar anytime soon. However, it stands that American debt is a problem of tremendous complexity and, as such, requires immediate action by the Trump administration. Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent aims to reduce spending and curb deficits with tariff revenue. He advocates for a more competitive, weaker dollar and will likely clash with Fed Chair Jerome Powell over monetary policy. Powell maintains strong bipartisan support for his management of inflation and interest rates, but after his term concludes in May 2026, Trump's new Fed appointee will likely pursue dollar devaluation to boost exports. While America has traditionally adhered to WTO principles, the Trump administration prioritizes putting America first, even if it means challenging established orthodoxies. And this is a stance that extends beyond trade policy and aims to confront decades of unchecked domestic spending and systemic financial mismanagement that has flourished beneath the surface of American prosperity. Led by Elon Musk, the DOGE initiative has uncovered perhaps the largest fiscal mismanagement in American history. The Treasury Department distributes $5 trillion annually without requiring payment codes or explaining fund allocation, a practice that would lead to immediate delisting and executive prosecution in the private sector. Similarly, DOGE has discovered the federal government channels billions of dollars into fraudulent NGOs operating with nearly no accountability, where employees receive substantial salaries. Musk estimates 90 to 95% of NGO funding constitutes pure waste. These organizations frequently function as patronage networks, rewarding political allies while producing minimal value. A luxury America could afford during unipolar dominance, but cannot sustain during great power competition. The administration's immigration enforcement further demonstrates how national sovereignty and internal security find shocking expression in the country's historical border control policies. A nation incapable of controlling who enters its territory cannot credibly claim sovereign power, and Trump's administration is enforcing strict border control. Denver's Mayor Mike Johnston has threatened a Tiananmen Square moment by positioning police and citizens at county lines to resist federal immigration enforcement. But Supreme Court precedent clearly establishes immigration as federal jurisdiction. This internal resistance to federal authority exemplifies a dangerous pattern that has demonstrably emboldened foreign adversaries to exploit domestic divisions. Border Czar Tom Homan possesses multiple enforcement options, deploying ICE, cutting Denver's funding, pursuing legal action against the mayor, or mobilizing the National Guard. Although Johnston may be performing a stunt to increase his political persona in the DNC, the exercise of federal power in this case would also serve a political purpose, enforcing immigration law while demonstrating the consequences of defying executive authority. Musk has further alleged that political interests have used illegal immigrant votes to attempt the creation of a permanent one-party state. There's little doubt that entitlements function as powerful magnets, draw in illegal immigration, and California, for instance, provides free health care to illegal immigrants, a cost that exceeds $9 billion annually, according to Musk. If true, this deliberate importation of dependent voting blocs constitutes a form of demographic gerrymandering that threatens the fundamental structure of the American electorate. Trump has implemented decisive measures to reassert sovereignty through border control. He requires asylum seekers to await processing in Mexico, has deployed military and National Guard assets to the border, and restarted barrier construction. ICE has detained thousands of illegal immigrants, with new detention facilities being established throughout Texas and Arizona. These measures aim to prevent both resource drains and demographic shifts that could undermine America by weakening internal cohesion and identity compared to China's fierce nationalist sentiments. The administration's education reforms recognize universities a battleground in the contest for elite opinion formation, a battlefield as consequential as any geographic domain in great power competition. With half of American universities reliant on federal funding for a quarter of their budgets, Trump possesses a decisive financial lever to reshape these institutions. By eliminating DEI programs across federal agencies and contractors, which functioned as ideological patronage networks and targeting K-12 teacher tenure while threatening university funding, the administration executes a calculated power play to recapture institutional control from what it sees as internal adversaries. This institutional realignment extends beyond education, with Trump's revival of Schedule F is converting 50,000 bureaucrats to political appointees, enabling swift removal of entrenched opposition and elimination of administrative waste that has long impeded executive effectiveness. Both strategies reflect a rational realpolitik recognition that a nation divided against itself, whether through fragmented educational ideology or bureaucratic resistance, cannot effectively compete externally. The administration's comprehensive approach to institutional reform demonstrates the pragmatic understanding that in systemic competition with China, a nation unified around core American values, operational efficiency, and meritocratic excellence ultimately outperforms one where competing internal agendas and administrative friction dissipate focus and resources. While traditional pillars of American power, economic strength and diplomatic influence, remain unquestionably important, technological superiority now stands as the paramount factor in determining global leadership, perhaps dwarfing other considerations in great power competition. American innovation continues to excel across multiple sectors that align with the administration's vision. CRISPR Therapeutics' 95% efficacy in 2025 Phase 3 trials exemplifies America's biotechnology leadership, while breakthrough mRNA innovations have compressed vaccine development from 5 years to 11 months. The manufacturing revolution enabled by 3D printing now produces over 63% of LEAP aerospace engine parts, while America's semiconductor industry is seeing massive growth with AI chip demand surging 80% year over year. The $42 billion federal investment in quantum computing resilience represents a bipartisan acknowledgement that quantum security constitutes an existential concern. If America's communications and financial infrastructure become vulnerable to quantum decryption, no conventional power could compensate. Trump's team has recognized the fundamental truth of 21st century geopolitics, that nations which dominate the technological frontier will dictate the terms of global competition across all domains, rendering traditional metrics of power secondary to technology supremacy. Within this landscape, artificial intelligence emerges as the most critical domain of competition. Global AI infrastructure spending reached $500 billion in 2024, predominantly driven by hyperscalers including Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. This massive private investment functions as a de facto industrial policy that operates through market mechanisms, a significant advantage over China's state-directed approach. While current AI systems still experience hallucination rates of approximately 15%, overcoming these technical challenges represents the next critical frontier of competition. The nation that masters reliable AI first will gain unprecedented capabilities, the likes of which have never been seen before. This perspective aligns with former Google CEO Eric Schmidt's assessment that achieving military superintelligence could fundamentally alter traditional war dynamics, which were historically determined by population size and industrial capacity. The implications suggest a multifaceted approach, strengthening cyber capabilities to protect American AI infrastructure, developing tracking systems for advanced AI chips, seamless fissile material monitoring, building resilient domestic AI supply chains, and enhancing military applications in autonomous systems. By treating computational power as a defining currency of the 21st century, the Trump team seeks to maintain a technical edge that complements its existing economic and military advantages. In this competition for AI dominance, the pragmatic reality is that technological leadership will render conventional metrics of power secondary to mastery of intelligence, while the quest for AI dominance underscores America's drive to secure a decisive advantage through computational power. This ambition must be viewed in tandem with immediate threats. The maritime balance in the Pacific illustrates this threat perhaps most starkly. The People's Liberation Army Navy has not only surpassed the U.S. Navy in vessel count, but has rapidly closed qualitative gaps through advanced destroyers, aircraft carriers, and nuclear submarines. This naval expansion serves Beijing's layered strategy, controlling the first island chain, the archipelagos spanning Japan, Taiwan, and the Philippines, projecting power throughout the second island chain, extending to Guam and the Marianas, and increasingly deploying forces globally. China's missile capabilities present an even more acute challenge, with the world's largest arsenal specifically designed to target American carriers, bases, and regional assets. These anti-access networks fundamentally alter the risk calculus for American operations within the first island chain. The consequences have manifested in increasingly sobering Pentagon assessments. Classified war games simulating Taiwan conflict scenarios show American forces suffering decisive defeats under realistic conditions, with carriers vulnerable to missile salvos, forward bases rendered inoperable, and air superiority contested from the conflict's opening hours. These simulations reveal a dark truth. China now possesses conventional superiority in its near abroad. Taiwan represents the flashpoint where all dimensions of US-China competition converge most dangerously. Beyond its symbolic importance to Chinese nationalism, Taiwan's position controls critical maritime passages while housing the semiconductor facilities that power the global economy. A conflict would trigger the most dangerous scenario in US-China relations, directly involving nuclear powers while disrupting global supply chains. Military casualties would only begin the cascade of consequences, as global GDP would plummet and advanced chip fabrication capabilities would suffer a technological extinction event. The Trump administration has moved decisively to counter these challenges. Secretary Rubio has prioritized strengthening alignments with Japan, Australia, India, and the Philippines, securing critical access for American forces. The Pentagon has accelerated development of autonomous systems designed to operate within contested environments, recognizing that traditional American advantages face unprecedented challenges from Chinese capabilities. The new distributed maritime operations concept envisions networks of smaller, unmanned vessels complementing traditional assets while complicating Chinese targeting. Unlike other domains where competition unfolds gradually, the military dimension presents the constant risk of sudden, catastrophic escalation. A miscalculation in the Taiwan Strait, an incident in disputed waters, or an intelligence failure could rapidly transform competition into conflict. This sobering reality makes military deterrence the ultimate test of American resolve and capability in the contest with China. As National Security Advisor Mike Waltz has noted, the tyranny of distance in the Pacific means we can no longer rely on overwhelming force. We need overwhelming technological advantage. This recognition drives the administration's approach, integrating military modernization, technical development, and alliance structures into a unified strategy. In this final and most dangerous dimension of great power competition, America's ability to maintain credible deterrence may ultimately determine whether the 21st century witnesses a managed competition or a devastating conflict that reshapes the global order. The stakes could not be higher, as military confrontation represents not merely one aspect of US-China competition, but its potential culmination, where all other dimensions of rivalry may ultimately be decided. As the clock ticks toward potential conflict, America stands at history's precipice. The Trump administration's unflinching realism confronts a world where idealism has given way to raw power calculations. China's rise presents not merely competition, but existential challenge, economically, technologically, and militarily. With Taiwan's semiconductor facilities representing both strategic prize and potential flashpoint, and China's military now capable of defeating American forces in their near abroad, the margin for error has never been thinner. The next 4 years will likely determine whether the 21st century belongs to American democracy or Chinese authoritarianism. In this crucible of great power rivalry, America's capacity to marshal its might, ingenuity, and military resolve may well decide not just its own fate, but the future of global order itself.